So what do you do when life doesn't turn out as planned? We're in the middle of a series, The Great Miracles of Jesus. And we've been saying, if you want to know what God is like and what God looks like, look at Jesus. That's why God sent Jesus. He is the clearest expression of God that you and I will ever see. What we see in Jesus is what we see in the nature and the character of God himself. And we've been looking at life-changing encounters that Jesus had with people who had big problems. And when they encountered Jesus, their lives changed that day and forever. And as we look at these encounters with Jesus, I want us to understand how Jesus can make a difference in your life and my life today and forever. So let's look at a story when life doesn't turn out as planned. John records these words in chapter 2, beginning at verse 1 of his gospel. It's a great, great story. He writes, "On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, 'They have no wine.'" Now, there are three things I want us to see in this story when life doesn't turn out as planned. First is the unexpected events of life, those things which are unscheduled. Let's look at the story. John tells us it's the third day. The third day of what? Well, Jesus was baptized by John in the Jordan River, and then he went into the wilderness, called by the Holy Spirit to be tempted for 40 days by the devil. Upon his return, in the next 3 days, he calls Philip and Nathanael to follow him. And so on the third day after he calls them, the third day after he returns from the wilderness, he goes to a wedding. Now, weddings in the tradition of the Jewish people of that day, of that particular period, lasted a whole week. The groom would invite the bride's family and his family and all their friends to his house for a big party. It would last an entire week, and each night was marked by a special meal. And then on the last night, there was the grand finale, where he would treat everyone to a great celebration. And that's where we find Jesus. Cana is a sleepy little village about a day's walk, about 9 miles from Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. Scholars think that the population of Nazareth in the time of Jesus was about 500 people. And Cana would have been 30 to 40 people. It was on the low end of the economic scale. It was for those people that couldn't afford to live in Nazareth. And life was hard there. It was tough. People would eke out an existence. So when there was going to be a great party, it was a big deal. Imagine the couple makes out the invitation list. It grows and grows as they do for any of us who've had weddings. We know that the invitation list gets larger and larger and larger. And interestingly, the mother of Jesus, Mary, is invited to this wedding, and so is Jesus, and he brings his two disciples, Philip and Nathanael, with him. Now, a wedding is an elaborate time. At this particular time, you would spare no expense. You would wait all of your life for this moment. And we'll see in a moment, as John records for us, this couple hired a master of the feast, an ancient day wedding planner, to make sure that everything would go right. And at the wedding, there was an open bar, free wine for everybody. And everybody's having a great time. And the groom and his family have a big smile on their faces. But there was a big problem. They ran out of wine. It was the worst thing that could happen. People had traveled to get there. They had taken a week off of work. And when they ran out of wine, the family was stunned. They were embarrassed. They were humiliated. They looked foolish. I can see the head of the family, the father, saying, "I'll never be able to hold up my head in this town any longer." They had waited all their lives for this great day. And now it was the ultimate disgrace to run out of wine. Isn't it amazing how much of life is lived in the unexpected, in the unscheduled, that crowds into our lives? No matter how much we plan and we diagram and we scheme and we map, I have a saying that it seems to me like 90% of life is lived in the surprises, the things that I don't really anticipate. As I look back on every year, I do not anticipate many of the things that have a major impact on the way that year is lived out in my life. We've just been through this whole COVID-19 virus. Unexpected, came out of nowhere, dramatically altered and changed our lives. Some lost loved ones. Some are still sick. Our kids lost a year of education and that whole experience that goes with it. Businesses are no longer in existence. We had a year of our lives that was a devastating time, and it will take us a long time to recover. What do we do when life doesn't work out as planned? I just had a friend who we had a memorial service. He was 73 years old, and we had some very, very frank discussions, straightforward discussions in the last several weeks of his life, and then the final eve of his death. And part of that is dealing with, I didn't expect this. What happened? I did not plan on this in my life. It seems like life can turn on a dime with these unscheduled disruptions. When they come, they cause us a lot of unanswered questions. So Mary turns to Jesus and she says, do something. Mary says to Jesus, they're out of wine. Do something. You're my son. Do something. And Jesus responds to her in verse 4 with these words. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Not only is there the unexpected events of life, but there is the unfolding of the plan of God in our lives. The mother says to Jesus, do something. He says, woman, what does that have to do with me? Now remember, he's just come back from his inauguration of ministry after the temptation in the wilderness, and he's called 2 disciples. And he's trying to make a distinction here. You have been my mother, and you've been a wonderful mother to me. But he doesn't say to her, okay, you're my mom, so I'll do you a favor. No, he doesn't. He says, woman, my hour has not yet come. He uses that phrase over and over and over again. My hour has not yet come. He is referring to his death on the cross. He is saying, it is not time for me to yet die. I have a mission to accomplish, and now I am starting that mission. So you will see that my role has changed from just being your son to being the Savior of the world. I have a mission to accomplish. I have a bigger picture, and I am just getting started. But now I love this. She doesn't buy that. I'm still your mother. And so she turns to those around the servants and she says, do whatever he tells you. She's still his mother. She still knows him. She knows that you will do something for me and for these people. In verse 6 we read, now there were 6 stone jars there for the Jewish rite of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. And they filled them up to the brim. 6 jars, 6 20 to 30 gallon stone jars. That would hold 120 to 180 gallons of water each. They represent the Jewish rite of purification, the ritual of washing developed by the religious leaders of the day. Whenever you entered a house or whenever you had a meal, you had to cleanse yourself of any sin so that you didn't bring them with you. As you'll recall, the scribes and the Pharisees in the intertestamental period, those 400 years between Malachi and the baptism of John, had developed an elaborate system of religious duties, rules, laws, obligations, all designed to place us in a position of special standing or favor by God by what we did. And so water represents the religious rite of cleansing. And because it's a week-long event, and there was a lot of food involved, They needed a lot of water. Water was required to cleanse the people throughout the week. So Jesus says, fill the jars with water to the brim, overflowing. Now, imagine what this must be like. They have to go to a well or a stream somewhere and take little jars, maybe that hold a gallon of water. If they're at a well, they've got to lower down a bucket into the well. They've got to get the water. They've got to pull it back up, pour it into a jar, and journey however far this person's house is from that water source. They've got to carry it a jar at a time to fill up these huge 20 to 30 gallon jars. They would pour the water into the larger jars over and over and over again. 1 gallon is about 8 pounds. We're talking here about 1,500 pounds of water. It's a lot of labor. It would take hours and hours of work. It is the unfolding of the plan of God. This is the unfolding phase. And I love this phrase, do what he tells you. When the unexpected crowds into our lives, it raises a lot of questions. Why do this? Why do all of this work with this water? Do what he tells you. Well, how long is it going to take? Do what he tells you. Well, it doesn't make sense to me. Do what he tells you. This is hard. I'm getting tired. Do what he tells you. But we don't need water. We need wine. Do what he tells you. Fill it to the brim. I remember when I was doing youth ministry that there was a fella that I met in his junior year who was far from God, and I prayed that he would come to know and have a personal relationship with Jesus. So I spent a lot of time with him, just getting to know him. We'd go to amusement parks or miniature golf or whatever it took to get a relationship with him. I took him to our Young Life Club events, and he heard me speak many times. I even drove him to a summer camp so that he could spend a week listening to the best speakers and have the best time of his life, but he was not buying. And finally he graduated, and I thought, man, I was so discouraged. I talked to a fellow young life leader, and he said, you just got to keep chopping wood. Just keep doing what God tells you to do. Just keep filling the jar with water. That's our only responsibility. Well, about 15 years later, I got a letter in the mail from him, a 3-page letter saying, you never knew this, but I gave my life to Jesus. You took me to so many places, and I took in every word, and I gave my life to Jesus, and it stuck. And today I'm happily married. I have 2 kids. I live in Houston, Texas. And I just want to thank you for all the time you spent getting me into the presence of God. Sometimes we never know the results of what we do. Just do what he tells you. Fill the jar to the brim. This is the unfolding process of God. This is listening to the voice of God. It is doing what he tells you. Jesus says, you are my sheep. You can hear my voice. Now, when we hear his voice, there is the hidden will of God and there is the revealed will of God. The hidden will of God is that which is going to happen in the future. And very seldom does God let us know what that is going to be. He doesn't always let us know what's going to happen, what the results are going to be. But he does give us his revealed will in his holy scriptures. He tells us the kind of people that he wants us to be. He gives us the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, tolerance, fidelity, self-control. I will tell you who you should be. I won't tell you necessarily what's going to happen or what the results are, but I'll give you more than enough information to know how to live a life and how to raise a family and how to have a healthy marriage and a healthy life. I'll tell you all of that. It is the revealed will of God. And so that requires chopping wood. That requires do whatever he tells you to do. Be the kind of person that God has instructed us to be. In verse 8 we read, and this is Jesus speaking, and he said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. Remember, first there's the unexpected events that crowd into our lives. There's the unfolding plan of God. And now there's the unveiling glory of Jesus. Jesus says, draw out the water and take it to the master of the feast, the modern day wedding planner. And he tastes the water. And then he calls the groom and he says, get over here. Get the groom over here. Hey, what happened? Where did this wine come from? Where did you get the wine? In verse 10 we read, and now this is the master of the feast speaking. And he said to the groom, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. That is the last. The master of the feast says to the groom, it's our tradition, our custom, that we serve our best wine first, and then after people have drunk freely and they're a little high, we give them the bad wine, the poor wine, because they won't know the difference. But here you've kept the good wine for last, for the very end. Think about it. People spend fortunes growing vineyards to produce great wine. Just imagine when all the power of the Creator God of the universe grows a vineyard in his garden, and he picks that wine and he gives it to you. Not just the best wine, but this wine that God gives, that God makes, is perfect, it's pristine, it's pure, it's flawless, it's grown in his own personal vineyard, in his own garden. And not only is it the best wine ever made, but there's a lot more than they can possibly ever drink. It's excess. To the brim, it's filled. To the brim. Isn't that the way God works in our lives when he blesses us? And so we read in verse 11, this, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifest his glory, and his disciples believed in him. John tells us early on, this is the first sign, the semeion, the first miracle, the first wonder that Jesus does. It is designed to reveal his identity. Remember, a miracle meets a present need, that is, they're out of wine, and it teaches a future and eternal truth, good for all people at all times and in all places. The principles apply for you and for me. The primary purpose and function of the miracle is to authenticate the miracle doer and the message that miracle doer brings. Thus saith the Lord. A semeion points to something beyond itself. It points to the person and the message of the sign. And in this case, it manifests the glory of God. All that God is revealed here in Jesus. And when they saw it, the disciples believed. I love that. They believed in him. The greatest miracle that day was not turning water into wine. It was that the disciples believed. They saw the power of the glory of God to change a human heart. John writes for us in chapter 1, verse 14, and the Word, that is Jesus, became flesh and dwelt among us. God sent him to reveal himself to us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. The monogenes, the only Son, is the clearest expression of God that you and I will ever see in this world. Blaise Pascal, the French mystic and philosopher, wrote when he was in his 20s that he wanted to find God, and he wouldn't stop until God revealed himself to him, made himself known to him. So he went out and he fasted and he tried to starve himself until God would answer, until God would make himself known. And finally, he was at the point of death. He had had nothing to eat and nothing to drink. And he was lying on his face in the woods, and he cried out to God. And he said to him, I realized that day that God would not perform some trick when I asked him to do a trick. He wanted me to open up my heart and call out to him, to be open and available to him. Now listen to what he says. At that moment, I realized that I had lived my life with three great delusions. One, that I could shape my own destiny. I could control my life. Two, that I could create my own happiness by myself. And three, that I could find my own security in life. Three great delusions. But the answer was crying out and making himself open and available to God. If we want a changed heart, we have to get to the place where we can't help ourselves. Life is too big and complex. There are too many things that crowd into our lives that are unexpected, unscheduled. Life tells us that we are not in control of our lives. We don't know the day of our birth, and we can't control the day of our death. Our days are numbered by God. But we can know who we are and who God is and how we're to live out life through his revealed will, of who we can follow for the rest of our lives. There's a God who loves us, and we can trust him because he wants the best for us. Jesus is the clearest expression of that God that we will ever see in this life. And so, the guests are happy. Jesus saved the celebration. The integrity of the family has been restored. The married couple are famous. They were famous in their day because of this miracle, and we still read about them today and tell their story. But if that were not enough, the great miracle was the disciples believed. There was a conversion. There was a change of the human heart, and only God can change the human heart. And so I want to invite us today to say, I want to give my life to you. I want you to set my heart on fire with love for you. I realize my life could change at any moment. So I want to be with you. I want to follow you. I want to be like you. I want you to lead and guide and direct my life. I want you to ignite my life with a heart that is on fire with love for you. So there is the unexpected event, the unfolding plan, the unveiling of the glory of God manifest in his Son, Jesus. At a wedding party, people had a moment with God. They believed. God's glory was manifest. And there's something unique that happens when our will combines with God's will, when our steps are his steps. When that happens, there is a great excess. To the brim, to the brim. There is a joy overflowing in our lives today and forever. Do whatever he tells you to do.